Too big to fail. Too big to jail. These aren't just clever phrases anymore. They are the invisible rules shaping your world right now. The rules that decide which companies rise, which collapse, which get punished, and which walk away untouched. And once you see how these rules actually work today in the 2020s, you'll never look at your bank, your government, or your favorite tech company the same way again. Because behind every crisis you hear about, financial crashes, data breaches, political meltdowns, even sudden market freezes, there is usually one quiet truth. The most powerful institutions don't just survive crises. They grow stronger because of them. And in a few minutes, you'll see exactly how they do it, and why it matters directly to your money, your privacy, and your future. This video is about the new age of untouchable institutions, from global banks to tech giants, from shadowy financial infrastructures to geopolitical powerhouses whose influence expands every time there's chaos. You'll discover why some organizations have reached a scale where punishment becomes impossible. Because punishing them would punish all of us. You'll see why new giants rise after every crisis instead of shrinking. And you'll understand how a system built on accountability slowly became a system built on strategic exemptions, necessary bailouts, and temporary measures that somehow become permanent. By the end, you'll know exactly how this quiet shift reshapes the world you live in, and how to recognize the next institution that becomes too big to jail before anyone else sees it coming. But before we dive into how they operate today, we need to start with the turning point that defined the modern version of too big to fail. And here's where things get strange. Everything changed not during a single event, but through a sequence of global shocks: the 2008 financial crisis, the 2020 pandemic, the supply chain breakdowns, the energy crunches, and the rise of digital monopolies. Each crisis removed one more barrier to accountability, one more layer of resistance, one more rule that used to apply, until suddenly certain institutions became so deeply embedded into daily life that no government, no regulatory agency, and sometimes not even the market itself could afford to touch them. And that's where your life enters the story, because whether you realize it or not, you interact with these systems every day. But here's what nobody tells you. Institutions don't become untouchable by accident. They do it through strategy, through timing, through crisis leverage, and through understanding that when the world gets unstable, people cling to whatever appears safest. Whether that's a giant bank, a global retailer, a trillion-dollar tech platform, or a government-backed energy provider. And the bigger the crisis, the more irreplaceable these institutions become. So the question is, how do these giants use crises as stepping stones? How do they grow while everything else shrinks? And what does that mean for you in the next big shock? Let's start with something familiar. Imagine a financial panic in your country. Markets crashing, people withdrawing savings, credit markets freezing. Who do governments call first? The same megabanks they later accuse of causing instability. Why? Because those institutions are so deeply wired into payments, credit flows, business loans, and consumer banking that if they go down, everything stops. Payrolls fail. Small businesses collapse. International trade halts. Even the government's own financial machinery can jam. So instead of punishment, these enormous banks receive the one thing no normal business ever gets: unlimited support. Not because they deserve it, but because the alternative would be catastrophic. That's what too big to fail really means. You don't save the institution for its sake. You save it because hurting it would hurt millions of innocent people. But here's the dangerous part. Once an institution is rescued, it becomes bolder. It learns that risk is not a threat, but a bargaining chip. It learns that the system cannot afford to lose it, and that gives it power most people never see. Think about what that means in your daily life. Your deposits, your mortgage, your job, your ability to use your credit card, your access to cash during a crisis. These are all plugged into networks dominated by a handful of giants. Giants that governments now rely on almost as much as citizens do. So punishment becomes negotiation. Accountability becomes a conversation. And jail becomes, well, a theoretical idea, not a real scenario. But it's not just banks. Not anymore. Because in the 2020s, a new category of institutions quietly crossed the same threshold: the tech giants. And unlike banks, they didn't do it through financial leverage. They did it through data, communication, and infrastructure. Think about the last time a major platform went down. Suddenly people couldn't message family members, businesses couldn't operate, hospitals couldn't access cloud services, logistics stalled, even governments faced communication delays. When a single company holds that much of the world's digital oxygen, shutting it down isn't an option. And what does that create? A new kind of untouchable power, one built not on money, but on dependence. This is the turning point, because now, being too big to jail doesn't mean being too wealthy or too politically connected. It means being too integrated into the structure of everyday life. And that shift is why modern crises produce giants, not casualties. After every major shock, the number of competitors shrinks, but the number of essential institutions grows, not in quantity but in size. You don't get 20 new banks. You get 3 surviving ones that absorb everything. You don't get 50 social platforms. You get 2 mega hubs absorbing billions of identities. You don't get dozens of global suppliers. You get a handful of entities controlling critical choke points in energy, shipping, microchips, pharmaceuticals, and cloud services. But here's what nobody tells you. The more concentrated a system becomes, the more fragile it becomes. Yet paradoxically, the more untouchable its largest nodes become. Because if the system is a web, the biggest nodes are the ones holding the structure together. Remove one and everything collapses. So instead of regulating these nodes, governments end up protecting them. Instead of splitting them, governments strengthen them. Instead of punishing them, they negotiate with them. And every crisis tightens that relationship. Let's look at a real example from the 2020s. Supply chains. When global shipping froze, countries suddenly discovered that a few logistics companies effectively operated as the circulatory system of the entire world. Containers, ports, freight liners, shipping routes, all controlled by a small number of institutions. If any one of them failed, entire continents would face shortages. Governments had no choice but to accommodate them, negotiate with them, and grant them exemptions that smaller companies never receive. And once again, crisis transformed giants into critical infrastructure. But what does critical infrastructure really mean? In theory, it means protection. In practice, it means immunity. Immunity to market forces, immunity to lawsuits, immunity to regulatory punishment. Because you don't destabilize infrastructure during a crisis, you reinforce it. And the people who run these institutions understand this perfectly. They know that the more essential they become, the more leverage they gain. The more leverage they gain, the less accountability they face. And the less accountability they face, the more risk they can take, because they know someone else will carry the consequences. This isn't a conspiracy. It's an ecosystem, predictable system, dynamic. And the most powerful institutions in the world have mastered it. Some push boundaries knowing they will be rescued. Others simply accumulate so much relevance that jail becomes unthinkable. Some become political tools too useful to punish. Others become economic anchors, too central to disturb. And all of them grow strongest when the world is weakest. What does this mean for you? It means your future is indirectly tied to institutions you can't vote for, can't regulate, and can't easily replace. Your financial safety depends on banks that governments fear punishing. Your digital life depends on platforms that essentially govern themselves. Your access to information depends on companies that control the world's communication arteries. Your job may depend on corporations so large that countries negotiate with them instead of the other way around. And when the next crisis hits, whether economic, technological, geopolitical, or environmental, the same cycle will repeat. Small players will fall, mid-sized players will scramble, and giants will walk out bigger than before. But here's the one question nobody asks. How does an institution become too big to jail in the first place? The answer is surprisingly simple. They grow during calm periods, but they solidify their power during chaos. Crisis is their cement. Crisis is their multiplier. Crisis is their opportunity. When everyone else retreats, they expand. When everyone else cuts costs, they buy assets. When everyone else collapses, they consolidate. And when the dust settles, they are the only ones left standing, bigger, stronger, and more entrenched. Take a closer look at energy giants during global energy crises. Prices spike, demand surges, supply shortens, and suddenly governments need these companies more than ever. They need their production, their distribution systems, their expertise, their capacity. They become partners instead of players, and the rules quietly shift in their favor. They are granted emergency powers, temporary exemptions, extended contracts, regulatory flexibility. And once again, temporary becomes permanent. Or consider pharmaceutical giants during medical emergencies. When the world needs vaccines, treatments, supply lines, and rapid research, who does it turn to? The largest companies, the ones with capacity, labs, distribution networks, and political leverage. They become indispensable. And when you are indispensable, punishment becomes negotiation. Mistakes become unfortunate complications. Accountability becomes process review. Jail becomes not in the public interest. But the most fascinating transformation is happening inside the digital world. In the 2020s, data platforms crossed the threshold from companies to essential infrastructure. Think about what that means. Your communication, your identity, your cloud storage, your business tools, your entertainment, your navigation, your digital wallet, all centralized under a handful of entities. These entities have become global-scale utilities without ever declaring themselves as such. And utilities are never allowed to fail. That's what makes them too big to jail. Because punishing a utility is punishing society. And here's the twist. Some institutions don't ask for this power. They simply grow into it. They become so embedded into daily life that removing them would be like shutting down electricity to teach the power company a lesson. It's not going to happen. So instead, society adapts around them. Laws bend. Exceptions multiply. Fines replace prison. Settlements replace trials. And the cycle continues. But let's zoom out and ask a bigger question. Why does modern society create untouchable institutions in the first place? The answer is both simple and alarming. Complexity. The more complex the world becomes, the more it relies on centralized actors. Complexity rewards scale. Complexity punishes fragmentation. Complexity amplifies the importance of the largest nodes. And as long as crises keep coming, economic shocks, pandemics, cyber attacks, geopolitical tensions, the world will continue to drift toward fewer, bigger, more essential institutions. And that brings us to the climax of this story, the perfect storm of the 2020s. A decade defined by volatility, financial instability, political polarization, digital acceleration, supply chain fragility, rising global tensions. Every one of these pressures pushes more power toward giants. Every shock reinforces their necessity. Every emergency reduces oversight. And every year that passes, the world becomes more dependent on institutions that cannot be punished without causing global damage. This is the critical point. Too big to fail used to describe banks. Too big to jail used to describe individuals protected by influence. But today, these two ideas have merged into a single ecosystem of global-scale entities whose power doesn't come from secrecy or corruption, but from structural necessity. And whether you like it or not, these institutions now shape your choices, your risks, and your opportunities more than most governments ever could. But here's the part you need to remember. Just because an institution is untouchable doesn't mean it is stable. In fact, the opposite is true. The larger and more essential an institution becomes, the larger the shock required to disrupt it. And history shows that when these giants eventually stumble, the fallout is enormous. So understanding how these institutions operate isn't just interesting. It's a form of protection. It helps you see where the system is fragile, where your risks are hidden, and where massive change is most likely to appear. And now we close the loop. Earlier I told you that once you understand how crises create untouchable giants, you'll never see the news the same way again. And now you can see why. Every headline about a failing bank, a hacked platform, a supply chain shock, or a political meltdown is not just a story about chaos. It's a story about opportunity for the institutions that will inevitably grow stronger because of it. And when you see which institutions are positioned to benefit from the next crisis, You can predict the future more clearly than most experts. So here's the takeaway. Crises don't just reveal power, they redistribute it. And in the 2020s, that redistribution almost always flows upward. If this opened your eyes, stay with us. This story isn't over yet. Every week, we uncover the hidden patterns behind the systems shaping your life. Like, subscribe, and join the conversation below. Your perspective matters because the only way to understand power is to look directly at the forces the world prefers to ignore.